Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you here on this beautiful spring evening. I think it's spring, despite the scarves and the jackets. Welcome to the opening night of Verdi's La Traviata. I'm Gary Murphy. I'm the president and the CEO of the Opera League of Los Angeles, the primary support group for LA Opera for over 40 years. The Opera League serves as a vital resource for community engagement and educational outreach, as well as hands-on volunteer work with many of LA Opera's staff, creative team, and performers. In addition to volunteering, we also offer nearly 80 different activities and events each year for our members, including seminars, master classes, recitals, and social gatherings, and provide supporting activities such as this pre-performance lecture by Maestro James Conlon. We invite you to join us. For information on how to become an Opera League member, visit operaLeague.org online or stop by downstairs at the shop at the Opera and pick up a copy of Bravo magazine. It's complimentary. It has really interesting behind-the-scenes articles as well as information on how to become a member. And now it is a great pleasure to tell you about this evening's speaker. Currently in his 18th season as music director, James Conlon has conducted 68 different operas by 32 different composers, and tonight marks his 464th performance at LA Opera. Last month, as many of you know, Mr. Conlon announced that 25-26th season will be his final one as music director. Just pause there for a second. It will mark both his 20th season in this leadership role and the 40th anniversary of the company. LA Opera's president and CEO Christopher Kelsch, along with LA Opera's board of directors, has named Mr. Conlon Conductor Laureate, a lifetime appointment in recognition of his distinguished tenure and contribution to LA Opera and the community at large, and in acknowledgement of the mutual intention for Mr. Conlon to return to the company as guest conductor. So, we're not losing him. Tonight, Mr. Conlon conducts Verdi's La Traviata, the first opera he led as LA Opera's music director, continuing his multi-season focus on the works of the great Italian composer. To date, Mr. Conlon has conducted more than 500 international performances of Verdi's masterpieces. At the close of this season, he will conduct Turandot, honoring the 100th anniversary of the death of another great Italian composer, Giacomo Puccini. One of today's most versatile and respected conductors, he has cultivated a vast symphonic, operatic, and choral repertoire. He has conducted virtually every major American and European symphony orchestra since his debut with New York Philharmonic in 1974. Maestro Conlon has conducted more than 270 performances at the Metropolitan Opera since his debut there in 1976. Through worldwide touring, an extensive discography and videography, numerous essays and commentaries, frequent TV appearances, and guest speaking engagement, Maestro Conlon is one of classical music's most recognized interpreters. Once again, thank you for joining us, and Maestro Conlon will join us very shortly.
Good evening, and I don't need that one because they've got me all hooked up. Can you hear me well? Good evening, hi up there. Lovely to see you. I'm glad you got here early because you got good seats. It'll be full by the end. We got a big crowd tonight, and I'm thrilled about that. And before I start telling you things, I want to ask you things, all right? Who's coming for the first time to Los Angeles Opera? Great. Welcome, and we hope you come back often. Who's seeing La Traviata for the first time? That's even better. Okay, I'm going to dedicate this performance especially to you, and the reason is because La Traviata was the first opera that I saw at the age of 11, and which was the beginning of the rest of it. I mean, my life changed within several months of that experience. I went to 3 or 4 other operas, and by the end of that time, I knew that classical music was going to be my life. And so I branched out, of course. I played the piano, I played the violin, I started thinking about conducting symphonies and all that. But my heart is back there, and the thrill that I got that night, unexpected, because it was sort of an accident that I went, can change your life. So in fact, that every time I conduct, I think of myself at that moment And I think that there's somebody whose life I can impact and change, presumably for the better, through this experience of this concert or this opera house. And so this opera, of course, you're very much on my mind, so I hope you're going to love it. And my advice always is, if you like it, come again, because you're going to like it even more the second time, because you hear more and you begin to absorb it. And if you don't like it, you should come again, because sometimes you get it the second time and not the first time. However, this is an opera that is so beloved, even the first time, because of the richness of the melodic invention is Verdi at his best. Now, just a few housekeeping things. You know that you can. I write long articles. Here, I brought it with me. Don't look now, but you have one in your program, but you have a short version. There is a long version online. Makes excellent bedtime reading. If you're having trouble sleeping, this will put you to sleep. If you read it, but if you look on screen, it may keep you awake. So there is also now a podcast so that you can hear me speak, but it's always, I never say the same thing twice. So you have you can catch up even after you've seen the show, because it's perhaps interesting. I think Gary probably told Gary Murphy, to whom I'm indebted because I have been his friend for so many years. I'm going to pass 50 performances of my life sometime in the next few performances here of La Traviata. And it's over 500 Verdi performances in my life. So it's been with me. He's been with me all of my life, and he is still with me today. I first conducted it in 1975, and aside from the thrill of conducting it at that time, and then I'll stop talking about myself, it is the production where I first caught sight of the woman who would become my wife and still is my wife today. She was in Jennifer Ringo, and she was in the chorus, and I noticed her in 1975. And she still looks great. And we've had two wonderful children, Louisa and Emma. And so the story of La Traviata doesn't end as happily as my story, nor the story, or Jennifer's story. I hope it's happy with me, because our leading character, Violetta, as she's called in the opera, does find true love, but is condemned first by the intolerance of society, and second, even more serious, tragically, by tuberculosis, as were many victims. They called it consumption, which is a blanket term for many diseases, but she was a real person. So follow carefully now. There was a real person. Her name was Marie de Plessis. She came from the country in France. She had a fairly difficult, traumatic childhood, went to Paris as a teenager, and went the only way that was open to many young girls and women. You couldn't walk into an office, you couldn't say, I have great skills, hire me. You couldn't go to schools. There was only one way, and she had the strength to realize, if I'm going to exist, this is what I'm going to have to do. And she does it. That's Marie de Plessis. She died at the age of 23. However, made a name for herself because she was apparently extremely intelligent, apart from being beautiful, charming, and she moved up through society very quickly. Of course, she was a businesswoman as well, and it was a business, and various men paid for her very often for several months, would keep her. They were called kept women. These are not nice terms. Courtesan is the word that is like to, but we don't even know what a court is anymore. So a courtesan used to be a person who was in a court. Rigoletto, for instance, refers to all of the courtiers as cortigiani. So it's a euphemistic term, but she was a sex worker, and she was so extraordinary that her reputation drew men from elsewhere. Amongst her many lovers was Franz Liszt. So he had his choices. I assure you, in his day and age. So that's the real woman. Now, a young man, a writer named Alexandre Dumas, French, of course, apparently fell in love with her. We refer to him as Alexandre Dumas fils, because he is the son, because his very famous father, Alexandre Dumas père, is one of the great writers of French literature. Now, the son is a little bit less so, but he made a name for himself with a novel where he took the life of Marie Duplessis, she added it because that wasn't there, and he turned her into Marguerite Gautier. And so he tells a story of his falling in love with Marguerite Gautier, and more or less the story that you're going to see recounted on the stage tonight. And so he wrote a novel, and the novel made an impression, and that was followed by a play. And the play was called La Dame aux Camélias. Now that is the woman of the camellias, which I guess are carnations. I don't know much about flowers, but I think that's the right, yeah. And she was famous because she would wear either a white carnation or a red carnation. And on certain parts of the month it was red, and on others it was white. And I'm not going to any further details, but you could figure out, and of course that was the symbol. And so she was called, both novel and play, La Dame aux Camélias, the woman of the camellias. Now, that's around 1848. Verdi read the play. We don't know if he saw it, but he liked it, and he thought this is a good subject. Whereupon we say, well, what made it a good subject for Verdi? Exactly at this time. This is the third of three operas which are referred to as the middle period masterpieces, the middle period trilogy. Three operas, all of which are famous, popular, and beloved. And he wrote them in a very short time. The first one of those is Rigoletto. The second one is Il Trovatore, and the third one is La Traviata. Now, he wrote this play, I should say, he took these three subjects because he was attracted to something daring, bold, and challenging to the audience. Now, it's common to say, oh, you know, those old-fashioned operas, you know, yes, we've all heard La Traviata, we've heard Rigoletto, Il Trovatore, we've seen the Marx Brothers rendition of A Night at the Opera. Yeah, they're silly things, they're old-fashioned. Well, the fact is they were not one bit old-fashioned. In fact, they were brazen and daring and challenging. And it is no accident that he took the subjects, because, first of all, the part of his genius was the choice of the subject, and then, of course, the rendering of the subject. Now, why are they so daring? It is because the protagonist in each of these operas is a representative of a class of people who are disparaged by society. Let's start with Rigoletto. I should also say that Verdi rarely took Italian subjects. Most of his French subjects, Spanish subjects, German subjects, three operas by Shakespeare, pretty common, very few Italian librettos. Victor Hugo wrote a play called The King Amuses Himself, Le Roi s'amuse. It was about François Ier, François the first of France, and he was a very famous man. He was forced to change the title because, well, that's a long story. I'll get back to that in a moment. Okay, the important thing is that the protagonist is a hunchback, a misshapen man who is morally ambiguous because he's pretty much of a misanthrope. And Verdi saw in this possibility a complex character. And the complexity is that we love him in the end. We all sympathize with Rigoletto because he loved his daughter, and because his daughter was his life and his treasure. And this is uncommon for operas. Why? Because people who are in one way or another physically challenged or handicapped are disparaged by society. So hunchbacks, for instance, or dwarfs. How many of you saw The Dwarf of Zemlinsky? Okay, there's a great second example of this, where a person with some kind of misfortune is actually the protagonist, and we sympathize with that person. Up until then, hunchbacks, dwarfs were playthings of the kings of the courts of Europe, Spain, France, or they were in circus acts, but not a tragic protagonist. And Verdi himself said, you know, everybody cried out when they said, putting a hunchback and making him the hero of my story, how terrible. He said, well, I liked it, and I still like it, and I wrote Rigoletto, so there. That's basically what he said. And when were they saying that? When he was arguing with the censors, because every piece he did was subject to censorship. And so he had called the title of Rigoletto The Curse, La Maledizione, and they didn't like that. Probably the representatives of the church did not like that, and they made him change the title. So he made up a name, Rigoletto, gave it to this court jester, and becomes Rigoletto, one of the great operas. When Verdi was asked several years after he wrote these three operas, what was his greatest opera? He said, if you ask me as a professional, I will say Rigoletto. If you ask me as an amateur, I will say La Traviata. And I have been trying to work that out ever since. Next season, you'll get to see Rigoletto. How many of you saw Il Trovatore a few years ago? Which we did? Okay. So the second opera is Il Trovatore. It's about a Roma woman who used to be referred to as gypsy. We should not do that any longer. Roma is the proper term. And why is it strange to have a protagonist as a Roma woman? Because they were usually in the operas for some kind of colorful entertainment. They told fortunes, they danced. In fact, the guests at the party at the end of Act 2 tonight are going to dress up and pretend they are Roma persons. So that was where they were, and Verdi had other characters in his operas who were Roma women, and they told fortunes or were somehow or other involved in other sometimes illicit activities, never as a protagonist. And for us to take the tragedy of this woman seriously, that was very... Now, please forget about the Marx Brothers. They were great. But Trovatore is often ridiculed as a plot. It is a little hard to understand. But the fact is, it was based on a true story. So in 1851, he writes Rigoletto. In January of 1853, he writes and premieres in Il Trovatore at the end of January, 1853. And in March of 1853, he premieres La Traviata. Why do I insist on repeating the dates to you? January and March of 1853. So that you realize at what incredible speed he wrote these two great masterpieces. Three, if you, even in a 2 years, to have three of them, it's great. But to write them between January and March, and the conception, which is so daring for each one of these operas, that's just absolutely mind-boggling. Verdi was asked in his older years, when he had come back from retirement and he wrote Otello, what is the greatest opera you think? What's your best opera? And he said, they all expect him to say Otello, and he said, I could write another Otello. I could never write another Rigoletto. Which means that after all of those years, that he had a special recognition that he really got it right with these 3 years. And now, what is the paradox of La Traviata? And it is that it was not common to give a leading role to a sex worker. It was not proper. You didn't do it. But he saw the possibility to turn conventional morality on its head and to show that in the end, this woman is the only person in the opera who shows an evolution and a sense of true love and generosity beyond any other character who's going to be on that stage. And so this is his way of challenging the public and challenging us today and saying, you know, we have these preconceived ideas about, you know, people who have physical handicaps, about people of certain races, like the Roma race is still marginalized in Europe, and persons who do the kind of work that Violetta did, Marguerite Gauthier, or Marie de Plessis, or whomever you want to call, people who do that type of work are disparaged. But we do them an injustice because they, too, are human beings, and very often, and what he's trying to show is that here's a woman who actually knows it all and what is essential, better than not just the men, but some of the other women, that she has got it straight. And her tragedy, that she will find a person who really loves her. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a dime to his name. That's a little bit of a problem, but I'm sure that would have been not a problem. The problem is his father. And his father is not evil and wicked. He's also a very complex, rich character. But as fathers who come from the provinces, and his famous aria is Di Provenza, means from Provence, he has a daughter, and he wants the daughter to make a fine marriage. And he has a problem because everybody seems to know that his son has openly been romantically, erotically involved with a woman who is in, you know, is of, they say, ill repute. So he goes to her and he says, you have to leave my son. And she says, I will not leave your son. And he says, you must. And then he wears her down to the point that she understands and she chooses to accept that sacrifice. Now, do I wish she hadn't accepted it? Yeah. I'm not sure that that would have been the case today. But in those days, you can't buck the system to that degree. And so she did, and this hastens her death in the sense that the broken heart and all that follows with it. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story. I'll tell you just a little bit. But that will hasten the moment of her death. And so Verdi, in these three operas, accomplishes something extraordinary. And you can read all about that in my article, which is called From Obscene Triviality to Traviata. The word in Italian is trivialità. And this was the accusation of the theater and the censors who talked about Verdi as having written an obscene triviality, Rigoletto, oscena trivialità are the words that they used. And that's when he said, and I'm going to do it again. And so he does. So he gave the name of this new opera he was writing, Amore e Morte, Love and Death. Now, not to be confused with Woody Allen's 1975 film, which is, of course, a spoof on Russian literature and War and Peace in particular. This was serious, and he wanted to call it Amore e Morte. And that is really the subject. However, the censors, who were getting used to the fact that they always had to fight with Verdi, usually the censors got whatever they wanted, except that he was becoming so famous that I think they sort of rolled their eyes and figured, we have to deal with this guy. Let's get it out. Let's just make him change the title. And so they did. And they landed on La Traviata, which literally means somebody who has lost their way. Traviata, via meaning way in Italian. And if that were a man, it would be il traviato. And it's a woman, so it is la traviata. That is what that means. A woman who has lost her way. And that's a euphemism, of course. But what we're going to see by the end of the opera is that she actually knows the way, whereas nobody else does. So there are people that think that Verdi has written a little bit of a story about himself. I refute this theory, which is that Verdi is not a man. He did not reveal himself personally in his operas. He had a understanding of humanity that belies any explanation. He was born not into poverty, but in the countryside. If any of you have ever been to his birthplace, it is moving, extremely moving. It is still a little town with a crossroad like that. There's one street like that, one street like that. You see where Verdi was born, where the house was shared with the animals on the other side. You could see the church where he was baptized when he was several days old and where he first played the organ. And you will see that he had to walk 7 kilometers every morning to go to school. And if you have ever been there, and I have been in January, and you see that the cold and the mist is so thick that you can't see several feet in front of you. And you know, we all think that Italy is a paradise with palm trees and lots of sunlight, and all of that is true. But it's also, there's a northern part of Italy where that is not true, and where the winter is hard, and for people who grew up on farms and in the, you know, as a part of the land, have a special appreciation of the difficulty of life. And he had that, and he, I believe, learned essentially about humanity in his early experience. Now, he was a musical genius, of course. He was sent to conservatory. He hated conservatory. He hated the rules. He didn't want to learn how to write a fugue. He didn't have any interest in writing a symphony. He never wrote a symphony. He didn't write violin sonatas or piano sonatas. He did not care about sonata form. He wrote one string quartet when he was an old man to keep himself occupied instead of playing crossword puzzles, because, you know, he should do this. But this was a man whose heart was in the theater and was in human drama, and that he showed over and over again, his great ability to portray people from different walks of life, from different countries, from different places, the nobles, the peasants, the simple people. No myths, no Nordic myths, as his colleague Richard Wagner was doing a few 100 miles north of him. No Greek mythology, no Roman mythology, that, in his opinion, had been exhausted during the 18th century. So he found his subjects wherever he felt like it. And one of the other amazing ironies about this work is that it was the only work that was based on something that was contemporary. Written in the 1840s, premiered the play, that is, and the novel and the play in 18. I brought one of my copies of the play. You can have a bilingual version, French and English. You can also read the novel if you want. They are interesting. There are a lot of details there that aren't in the opera. But he chose a contemporary play. He wrote it in 1853. That means the play was about 5 or 6 years old. He never did that again. And it was out of style. And it was so out of style that the Opera House in Venice, where it was premiered, insisted that he change the costumes and he set it in the 18th or the 17th century, and that everybody had to wear wigs. They purposefully removed it from contemporary life. Now, isn't that an irony? Because for the last, I don't know, 30, 40 years, opera houses have it's the cool thing to do, to take all those operas that were written in other eras with all those costumes and to make it more presentable to you by putting on modern dress. Modern dress was so out of fashion in Italy in the 19th century that Verdi was forbidden to have modern dress when he produced La Traviata for the first time. And it was going to be in the 1880s, before there would be a production where he could put on what people looked like in the 1840s. Without, he drew the line with the wigs. Apparently they did not wear the wigs at the premiere. That he couldn't stand. So you see, Verdi was at the cutting edge of pretty much everything going on. Now, I will give you a few overall things about the story. Hi, that's Michael, right? And he's going to help us. I brought musical excerpts. They're going to be very short, but I want to demonstrate some important, an important aspect in this work. But before I do that, I know you know the end of this before I start, but George Bernard Shaw said, an Italian opera is where the soprano, that's the highest female voice, the soprano wants to make love to the tenor, that's the highest male voice, and the baritone doesn't want to let them do that. That's opera. That's all you need to understand. But aside from the incredible wit of George Bernard Shaw, if you look at it, that is exactly what it was. That was a convention, and Verdi understood that convention and wrote in that convention, and this is no exception. So our heroine, our protagonist's name is Violetta, which is also not an accident, because violet is the color traditionally in the Roman Catholic Church of the period of Lent, and this opera will end right after Mardi Gras, which is the Tuesday before what was Ash Wednesday. So that's number one. It was the color of Lent, and it was also the color of mourning. And so the priest would wear vestments of violet at a funeral. And I remember my grandfather's funeral, because I was brought up as a Roman Catholic. I remember I was 12, right after I saw La Traviata, and I remember the priest with the violet. So that's, I am sure, part of this story. Subtle. He's not advertising, he's saying, Violetta, get it, get it, get it. No, he just writes her name, Violetta, and you've got it. And his audience got it. So Violetta is this woman, Marguerite Gauthier, Marie de Plessis, who has come to Paris. And we are going to meet her at a party where she is the hostess. And she's courted by many men at that particular time. There's a baron, there's a marquis, there's lots of carousing. This is a hedonistic society. They're going to carouse in Act 1, and then in another party, they're going to carouse at the second part of Act 2. But we're going to see the really personal scenes in Act 2, Scene 1, and of course, Act 3. But we get the overall picture of the society in which she is dealing and operating. So Violetta is the soprano, and yes, in the end, she's going to fall in love with the tenor. He's been in love with her for a year. And they're going to get together. That's great news. But there is a baritone, and he has to get his due, and his name is Alfredo. The tenor is Alfredo. And his father, baritone, is called Giorgio Germont. Germont, of course, French name. Alfredo, not a French name, but Alfredo Germont is the son, the tenor, in love with Violetta. And Giorgio Germont is the father, and in Act 2, he is going to come into the scene and become the obstacle that every baritone is supposed to be in every Italian opera. And so the story will go on, and you'll see that revealed. I mean, there are surtitles, so you can follow everything. And of course, you know somebody has to die at the end. You know that, right? For those of you coming for the first time, I'll give you that much. Now, why is that? Because to be a tragedy or a melodrama in 19th century Italy, there had to be a death. And we think, oh yeah, those operas, and it's usually the soprano, or it's the soprano plus others, but the soprano particularly is usually, and somehow that became the way, just as we had, Western movies of Westerns and war movies and cops and robbers and things. This was a form. People wanted to have that. They wanted to go there and experience maybe a catharsis through identifying and empathizing with this woman. And so she has to die at the end. I'll tell you that much, okay? But it's how she gets there. Somebody asked me, how does it feel to conduct an opera, for the 50th time? I said, great. Do you have a favorite part? I said, no. They said, why not? I said, because when I start the first note, since I know it, I know where it's going to go, and I know where it's going to end. And I am fascinated with the process. Every time I do it, of seeing how a genius of a composer, and that's not just Verdi, that's Mozart, that's Wagner, that's Puccini, that's, so many, of how they do it. It's how they do it, which is so extraordinary that never, for me, it never loses its taste. Now, Michael, ready to go? Now, the opera, remember, was called Death and Love, or Love and Death, okay? Now, Verdi is going to show us both love and death, and he has a very unique way of doing it. He did not like systems. The German composers had systems. They had forms. Italians had a convention, and they respected it, and Verdi respected it, but he changed it over the course of his lifetime. But he adopted a system, and I have actually I do not know of any place he referred to it or explained what he was doing, and I have rarely read anybody actually analyze it in depth. But for those of you who have studied music, this is going to be real easy, but if you haven't studied music, that's okay, it's also easy. There's something called a tempo. How fast does something go? There's fast, there's moderate, They're slow. Now, I can split it up into 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, 6 parts. But if, sort of like a computer, everything boils down to 2, which is called duple, or 3, which is called triplet. Triples or triplets. So everything is reducible in a bar, what we call a measure, a bar. So you can have 2 beats in a bar, 1, 2, 1, 2. You can have 4 beats in a bar, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can have 8, okay? And then you can have 3 and multiples of 3. So you can have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you can have 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the magic for Verdi of 6 is that he can combine it. He can have 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. And he can do 12/8, that's 4 times 3. And he has assigned duple rhythms. Those are 2, 4, right? 2 and 4. To the subject of death and life, or life and death. And he generally tells the love story in multiples of 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, the beginning is one of the most sublime pieces of music. 3 or 4 minutes, slow, sad. It is showing us already the death that we're going to see of Violetta in Act 4. Slow, okay? And you're going to count to 4 when you hear it, all right? I'm going to be beating 4 for the orchestra. If you can see me, you'll see that. 3, 4, right? Sad. And now to erase that, he throws us into a party, which is in fast 4. And there we go, Michael. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's a party, right? So, first of all, contrast. We know the end at the beginning, but now we're in life, and this is a frenetic life, her frenetic life. And this is the atmosphere. Okay, got it? 4. Now, let's hear the next one, Michael. I want to see what it is, because maybe this list is wrong. Okay, this is a waltz. And this is a brindisi. What is a brindisi? It's a drinking song. Popular form in the operas. And one of the world's most beloved melodies. I'm going to bring up the volume a little bit. Libiamo is let's drink. Now this is the tenor who has been given a challenge. Make a toast. And then Violetta's going to answer him. And they're going to sing together. And the whole chorus is going to, it's a drink at a party. That's their first encounter. And it's in 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we know it's about love. Okay, next one, Michael. Now, you hear a waltz in another room. Everybody goes off. This is the first personal encounter of Alfredo and Violetta. And he's going to declare his love. This triplet. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. That's how he knows about love. Okay, next one. He's declaring himself. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Very good. Okay, the next one. Hold on there, Michael. We're going to do that one again. This is the mirror image. After he goes out and all the guests leave, she starts to reflect. And now it's still 3. It's still in the same key, which was F major. Now it's F minor. It takes a darker color. And she is reflecting, maybe, a forse lui, maybe it is he who will touch my heart. So she starts to see the possibility of real love. We'll play this one again. That's Maria Callas, of course. 1, 2, 3. Very flexible. 2, 3. One. Very good. Okay, so we've had a mirror image to that. Okay, next one. The next most popular tune, Sempre Libera, always free. We hold on to 1 second. Okay, so what is this all about? This is a scena, a scene, and we get the convention here. Slow introduction, slow song, something changes and motivates a fast song. This way, every singer had an opportunity to show that they had breath control and could make beautiful phrases in the slow part. And then in the fast part, they had to show that they could sing quickly, something called coloratura or fioratura. They could sing high, they could sing fast. So Verdi has used the form, and he uses that form over and over and over again. Very gradually, he will change it toward the end of his life, but he's still accepting it fully. So now what does she say? Should I consider this love? This is a true love. Maybe I'm going to try this. And she says, no, sempre libera. I'm going to be free forever, and I'm going to go from post to post. That's not what I do. That's what I know. I love it. But there's a sense of denial a little bit, because she's not convinced yet. We're not convinced yet, but this is a famous... So this is the same one again, Michael, if you will. One, two, three, four, five, six. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1. 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you see, it has the magic of being 2 and 3 at the same time. So it's both about life and it's about love. Okay? Next one, please, Michael. This one has to come way up. It's very soft. Okay, we'll just stop it there. We'll come right back to that. So the father, Germain, comes to visit her in the second act. You won't meet him until then. And he is going to say, you have to leave my son. Basically, she's going to say no. They're going to fight. They're going to negotiate. He's going to wear her down. And she's eventually going to agree because there's a young girl, the sister of Alfredo, who wants to get married. And because she has had a quote-unquote pure life, she deserves to have a pure marriage. And so the fallen woman, should get out of the way. Now that's a tragedy, that somebody makes her feel that way, and that she accepts it. And that's a long, complex issue. This is the moment she surrenders. This is slow 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is also 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which means it's about love, but at the same time, there's 2 in 6, there are 2 3s, and so therefore, it's about life, and here, it's about death, because she sees her tragedy in front of her. Okay, great. We'll do the next one. Father Germain saying, weep, weep, yes. There is some kind of fatal attraction between the father and Violetta. There's nothing erotic about it, but maybe it's a father figure. One of the great questions is, why does she give in? And how is he able to speak to her in such a way that she gives in? I'm not proposing an answer. I am proposing a question. And people have been arguing about that ever since, okay? This is also 6, so it's about love and it's about death, okay? And we go to the next one. And this is the moment when Alfredo returns and she says, love me. Love me as much as I love you. She knows she's going to leave him. It's not her. This is the moment of the great renunciation. important subjects. You'll hear this played by all of the orchestra. Now, that was, yes, it was about love, but it wasn't too, because it's really about the end. It's really about death. Okay, next. This magnificent moment, and now we're back in another party. Violetta has a girlfriend, her name is Flora, and she's giving a party, and they're playing cards. Listen carefully to the orchestra. You can hear the shuffling of the cards, but Verdi uses it as a technique to agitate us. So here's what's happening. Alfredo has discovered that she's gone back to one of the men who was sleeping with the Baron, and he comes to confront her. And he's going to confront her in public at the party, and there's going to be all the characters are going to come together. 6/8, which means what? 2 and 3 at the same time. Life, death, and love all together. Okay, next one. The father arrives at the party and basically admonishes his son. You have treated a woman badly in public. You must never do that. Okay, on we go. Next one. Broken-hearted. In 6, actually in 12, so we get 4 times 3. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2. Okay, love, death. Okay, next one. This is the slow prelude to the last scene, where we will meet the death motives again, and they are in 4. Almost done. 2 more. Here's the penultimate one. Oh, sorry. You can hear her weeping in the violins. You don't have to know she's sad. You hear it. Okay, next one. They're coming to get me. Okay, next one. This is the love theme in 3. And that is how Alfredo first told her that he loved her. And now she's reading a letter from Father Germont telling her and us what happened after Act 2. I'm not going to tell you anything about that. Okay. I'm so happy. So many of you have come in late. Thank you. Welcome to you all. And for those of you who are coming to the opera for the first time, a particular welcome for those of you that are hearing La Traviata for the first time. I told the people that were here right up in front at the beginning, it was the first opera I saw when I was 11 and made me fall in love with opera. I hope to make you fall in love with La Traviata and opera, all of that tonight. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you again.